My name's Evan Gatesman, and this is the Sustainability Podcast from Nevada Conservation League, where we're working to create conversations around sustainability. And the Nevada Conservation League is the independent political voice of Nevada's conservation community. We work to maintain and enhance the natural character of Nevada and the quality of life for Nevadans through effective advocacy, the election of pro-conservation candidates, and building collaboration. And today we're going to discuss Juneteenth. In some parts of the country, they celebrate, it's the celebration of the emancipation of slaves. But now, according to Juneteenth.com, it now celebrates African American freedom and achievement while encouraging continuous self-development and respect for all cultures, which is an idea I think we could all get behind in this time of great divide. And it's my pleasure to introduce our next guest, Linda McCleod. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? Thank you.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure having you on. So do you celebrate Juneteenth?
Yes, I do. I was introduced to Juneteenth around 1990 in Florida. I'm in Florida, and we were having this big celebration in the park. I, at that time, had a business where I wrote poetry and I sold my wares. And someone had introduced me to Juneteenth, and they said, we're having this big celebration in the park. It's a whole day of speakers and doing stuff, and it's cost you barely nothing to come. And at that time, I had just started my business, and I went, and I had such a good time, and I wanted to continue to celebrate, so I continued to celebrate over the years. One of the local churches had a drumming circle, and we had drummers that do African drumming and dance. And it was pretty powerful. So.
What is Juneteenth like as far as rituals? Like Christmas, you're expecting presents. Thanksgiving, you're expecting the big feast. Like the typical holidays that we're familiar with. What kind of rituals do people do on the holiday?
Well, Juneteenth is really a different kind of a holiday. So what happened why we celebrate Juneteenth is because the African American slaves in Texas did not find out that they had been freed for 2.5 years. So the Emancipation Proclamation was generated in January 1st, 1963. And then it was in 1965, June, that the slaves in Texas were told that they were free. And so they have been celebrating in Texas since 1866. But it wasn't a national holiday, it was just a local holiday. And then as the years, come up, it would build up and people would celebrate. They would have picnics in the park. They would get together and they would have parades, and they would do things just to recognize they called it Black independence, which is the Emancipation Proclamation. And so people have church ceremonies, and they have speakers that come out and talk about where we've come from, where we're going, and the message that people aren't aware of. And so it's more of an educational kind of holiday.
Wow, awesome.
Oh, I also had a wee bit to add. So as Miss Linda kind of alluded to, it was originally a regional holiday. But as you see the first civil rights movement start to get off the ground after the end of Reconstruction in the 1880s, and the second civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s, you see the holiday becomes more popular with each successive wave. So it's one of those things that, like, as people are fighting for their rights, it's one of those holidays that makes a resurgence.
Well, this year's going to be interesting because of the pandemic. So people are around the country. There's only 3 states that really doesn't celebrate Juneteenth: Hawaii, North Dakota, South Dakota, and there was one other state, and I have to find it in a minute. And that was interesting. But most of the states celebrate Juneteenth, and it's and during the 1980s, we had our first president to actually acknowledge Juneteenth. And so through the years, most presidents have acknowledged Juneteenth as a day of celebration for the African American people. And it's interesting because they were saying last year, our current president did acknowledge it. And so with this year coming up, we'll see if Juneteenth get acknowledged again. but it's a very important holiday for African Americans because it's a time to really celebrate our history and the courage that it has taken for African Americans to be successful in life. And it's a Jubilee kind of holiday where we, like I said, singing, dancing, parades, and then allowing people to share their culture. So like I said, the very first one that I went to was very powerful because I wasn't, it's like, wow, here's a holiday that we can celebrate. And so it was like, I'm from Florida. Florida started celebrating Juneteenth officially in 1991. And that's kind of interesting because my daughter was born in 1991. So it's a two time of the year holiday for me because of that, being pregnant the year that we celebrated Juneteenth. And then also the awareness that as we've gone through this, through the years, and like Branden said, there's been times when we were up and times when we were down, where like the civil rights movement, during the civil rights movement, Juneteenth kind of went down, but after the civil rights came back up, it became another holiday of celebration of honoring the accomplishments of African Americans. And so now this year, like I said, it's going to be interesting because of the pandemic is how we're going to celebrate. I know, for example, I've been listening at some of the speakers and they're saying they're going to be more like this kind of celebration with Juneteenth, with Zoom meetings. And this year is also because of what's been going on in the news, there's going to be more about the racial and the racial issues that are occurring, and not just in America, but around the world. And Juneteenth is not just like celebrated in the United States. A lot of the countries around the world do celebrate Juneteenth.
Awesome. Like I was aware that Juneteenth was the emancipation of slaves, but I didn't know that it was also celebrating these people that basically worked as slaves long after they had to, like long after they were free.
Yeah. It'll be interesting today when things happen, it's still that times when there's parts of the country, even with television and Instagram and, local, there's still people who are not really interested in what's going on in the world. They're more interested in their own communities and what's happening in their communities. And so even though we have all this technology, there's still places in the world and even in the United States that's not really into the political arena of what's going on in the world.
Yeah, that makes sense. I did read a little bit about Juneteenth on their website, juneteenth.com, and I read that certain parts of the history, like there was immense backlash for celebrating this holiday.
It's interesting because it's not one of those holidays that are, that's widely talked about in the white community. It's more of an African American community celebration. So through the years, maybe after last year when we were in a ministers' conference, there was a lot of people that were unaware of that, and we had suggested that someone at least mention that, and the person who mentioned that was clueless. And so a bunch of us got together and actually corrected the data of what it really is. It's like you said, it's really awareness that you think about it, people were free for 2.5 years before they even knew about it. They had no awareness. They were still, I'm surprised they didn't go back and ask for the labor that should have incurred for those last 2.5 years. Suing those farmers and saying, hey, where's my labor for pay for the last 2.5 years? And I'm sure that has happened. So it's been a slow progress. There are still states that up until 2011 that was just starting to hear about Juneteenth. And I think that's as we're becoming more and more conscious of the African idea of being African American, and as we're becoming more conscious of what has happened in our country, and then as when we're, as we are becoming more conscious of sharing our history, and especially in this last 3 years when we've becoming more and more aware of the 400 years of slavery, and we say 400 years of slavery, but when slavery started, when slavery ended, it has never really ended in the idea that the true idea of freedom for all people has been equal. There's been these Jim Crow laws, there's been segregation issues that have occurred that is still occurring, you know, and so we have to look at what is the true purpose of these holidays and how we can be a part of it and then celebrate all of our culture, not just part of it, but we have you know, things that have occurred in all the communities. And this year, I think we're looking more at a collective community, not just the African-American community, but the collective whole is how do we as a community pull together so that we can all enjoy the freedom that all of us enjoy, all races.
That makes sense. I've got some friends from Rhodesia. I think it's modern day Zimbabwe, I'm pretty sure. And they ended up moving to South Africa or from South Africa and then coming here. And I looked into South Africa a little bit after that, and wow, the apartheid that they've been through has been really crazy too. Kind of curious if this holiday, Juneteenth, is also celebrated down there. I guess not, because it's like an American thing, right?
Well, it's not. A lot of countries, and I was going to look it up and see what all the countries were that do celebrate, but it's celebrated in countries outside of the United States. Some of the islands are celebrated. Germany celebrate. So there's other countries that are actually celebrating the holiday because there's a lot of African Americans in England because they have left either the islands or yet left the state and become part of those cultures. And so the more we have African Americans around the world that are starting to celebrate the different ethnicity of our people, the more that you're going to find these kind of holidays of people coming together as a collective to be recognized as descendants of African people.
So if you're looking at internationally where you see the holiday celebrated, you see it in nations that had a much closer connection to the African slave trade. So Liberia, there's some limited engagement with the holiday. Ghana, it's a lot of places where you have a huge expat community of Black Americans.
Interesting. So like as far as the rituals, you said there's like a big picnic culture in it?
Yeah, and it's interesting because in Texas and places across the country, you know, you've heard of the Black Rodeo. So part of the Juneteenth is the Black Rodeo because of what Texas, you know, the huge cattle company. And so part of that observant, you know, is, singing traditional songs, celebrating with picnic, rodeos, state fairs, cookout, family reunions, Black parties, historical reenactments, blues, and some states have actually missed Juneteenth contest. So it's, you know, people are actually celebrating the idea of those things that sometimes you don't think of as traditional African American kinds of events. So the Black Rodeo. My niece was laughing the other week because she says, I went, it was awesome. It was so beautiful to have these, you know, these really powerful people, African people, you know, riding horses, catching cows and bulls and all that kind of stuff. So it's a fun time. It's a time of just really coming together and recognition. We have our family reunion in July. And so, so we missed it by that time frame when Juneteenth is. So we usually have the same kind of thing, a picnic, and we have some time together celebrating our heritage. And one of the things that I do like about our heritage is that we do have it as part of my family. We can trace my grandfather all the way back to slavery, my great-grandfather all the way back to slavery. And he was an educated African-American in slavery, which is quite unusual sometimes. And so that makes it, you know, I came from a family of educated African-Americans. And so we celebrate our heritage. We celebrate the lineage that we came from. And we were taught African-American history as children because I went to a segregated school in my early part of my career, you know. So I have this idea of understanding for me my heritage and how important it is as an African-American to understand that I didn't start with slavery, you know. The idea is that we did not bring slaves to America. We brought people to America. And it was like, wow, the first time I heard that, I was like, what? Oh yeah, we didn't bring slaves to America. We brought people to America who we made into slaves. Whole different idea. So if I start to look at where I came from and the culture, like you said, South Africa, but South Africa is really not all of Africa. You know, there are kings and queens in Africa that are taking, you know, ownership of their countries and their nations. And so it's a wonderful history that we have. And so Juneteenth is just another one of those days that we as African Americans can enjoy our history and tell our children about it and let them know the struggles that we have been through as African people. So I mean, I love my history. So it's like, where did we come from and where do we go from here? And especially in these days when we're trying to figure out what's next. And Juneteenth is a good opportunity for people to come together and ask those questions, what's next, in forums like this, which is really great. I'm so thankful for you that you have this opportunity to bring some ideas so that people in places that are not normally celebrating can start to celebrate and bring young African-American children into the fold and have them understand that their history is important to them, and not just the American history, but the history that goes back to the beginning of time with their culture from Africa.
Thank you so much for that. There are some other activities that they list on the website are rodeos is number 1. So that must be like the big thing. That's pretty cool. I never heard of that. But fishing, barbecuing, baseball, that sounds like so much fun to me.
So it's a lot, you know, so this idea of Juneteenth, you know, is really, you know, an important celebration for me, you know. So they were saying this year, though, that a lot of some of the major corporations was actually going to support Juneteenth by providing funds and providing day off for their employees. In some states, you know, like I worked for corporate America, I worked for Honeywell for a long time, and there were certain holidays that we could trade in for other holidays. So we could use you had like 12 holidays, and of those 3, you could switch in for other holidays. And so a lot of us would take off Juneteenth if it was during the week, and to celebrate Juneteenth, to recognize that holiday as a way of supporting the African American community.
Interesting. Yeah, I wonder if the barbecuing and picnic idea is kind of from the origin of it coming from Texas, because I think it originated in Texas and then kind of sprouted out from there.
Well, it wasn't just that it was from Texas. That was, I don't want to say it was like traditionally a Black thing, but barbecue specifically was something that was heavily associated with the Black community, mostly because of the time it took to make barbecue. So no one really wants to sit in front of a smoker for 12 hours if you don't have to. So especially before the end of slavery in the U.S., a lot of that work was handled by slaves. And after the end of the Civil War, it stayed as a big part of not just Southern cuisine, but also Black cuisine.
Well, I have friends from the island, and they roast pigs, and you know, they have the big holidays where they cook up stuff. So it's part of the culture to get together and have a big event. And so barbecue, as we know it today, is a little bit different than a barbecue from back then. It was an opportunity for families to get together and celebrate, whether they had the big barbecue, but it was the food. What is the statement? The family that prays together and eats together stays together. And so to break bread with someone is an opportunity to, if I invite you in my house and I break bread with you, I'm accepting you as part of my family. And so that's that food idea, is that we're family because we're serving each other, we're breaking bread with each other.
Yeah, I actually have a little bit of culinary background myself, and I love how food connects people. And that's one of the best things that So with barbecues.
For example, food is a excellent way to join people together. And I worked on a diversity council in my corporation. And one of the things that was, we had this event every year, and we would have a banquet. And part of that was for us to bring in different cuisines And we would have this big event, and we would have this big gala for people from different cultures to bring in the different foods. And sometimes it was interesting because you're a lot of Southerners that brought food that, you know, we were like, are you traditionally Southern? You know, because the collard greens, the cornbread, the watermelon, all of those things, the peas, you know, we just think of, you know, as African American, but it's like if you're a Southerner, that's the foods you ate, you know, sweet potatoes, all of those things were Southern foods. So you go into these restaurants, you go to, oh, it's a Southern restaurant and they got collard greens and fried okra, you go like, But those are, you know, those are the kind of things that we, you know, we have. It's pork.
Did anyone bring hogmaws to one of those banquets?
Oh, I don't think so.
Okay.
Hogmas? What's that?
Hogmaw, pig snout.
Yeah.
Pig snout.
Hog
Oh,
jaw.
okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, it's wild.
Yeah.
That does remind me of Hawaiian culture a lot, though, too. How they have the rotisserie pig as the standard traditional thing, as a stereotypical thing, I guess.
Yeah. Most cultures, you know, there's an interesting thing that a lot of the cultures do have the same general idea of getting together and enjoying each other, you know, in a family kind of way, you know. Even, you know, we always laugh. We always, my friends are, you know, oh, the Italian families, we get together and we just eat. And I'm thinking, well, black families get together and eat too. You know, Greek families get together and eat, you know, because like, you know, it's that time of getting together and being with family and friends. And when you can be with more family and friends, when you have a common cause or a common celebration, it makes it that much better. And, you know, it's like going through and looking at the states, you know, and the celebration and what each state does. You know, I was surprised that there wasn't a theme. And I'm thinking back, Juneteenth is the theme, you know. So it's the idea of, here's Black celebration, you know, emancipation, Jubilee. We have finally recognized that we are free again, you know, and that we can celebrate together as a collective community.
Perfect. I couldn't have put it better myself. I really love the concept too. It reminds me of instead of building a higher wall to build a longer table. I mean, invite more guests and get more people together, you know, instead of trying to build walls after walls, unfortunately.
I don't want to say it, but I will say, you know, I never understand why we have bars on our walls and why we have, you know, gated communities. And to me, that is such a sad situation where we can't live in communities and be together and learning how to manage our lives together. And I guess that's part of this whole journey is we as learning to be human beings and trusting each other. It's about having the common compassion for other people and honoring their nationalities and honoring their beingness instead of trying to constantly separate us based on some identity that we put up. If we go back to slavery and what its purpose was to build the economy of the South, and that if we, you know, working together instead of working separately, we can build the economy of the country, and that we don't have to use the labor of one person or one group of people to build that labor force. We can make it available for everybody that we can share. And I think Juneteenth is a time to just recognize that it's okay, you know, that we come out of this and we celebrate, you know, that we celebrate the freedom that we have gained through this process, and that, you know, the wars and all of the things that have occurred were because of finances. The war was not fought to free the slaves because it would have freed all the slaves. It only freed the slaves that were in the Confederacy. And so then we start to understand that this whole idea of freedom was just to celebrate certain 10 states, really. And then now it's expanding, you know, so that we can all have this idea of joining into a celebration of the, I call it African American emancipation, to celebrate this time when we can come together and acknowledge where we came from. And I think I said in the beginning, to acknowledge where we came from. And that's the important part, is to be able to acknowledge that it happened, that it occurred, and now we can keep moving forward in this journey of recognizing our individual beings and then our collective being.
Perfect. I mean, it doesn't get much better than that. So I just wanted to thank you so much for being on our show. And I just wanted, my pleasure. You've been very fantastic. Can't say it enough.
Thank you.
I just wanted to mention you should check out our Facebook page. And once again, we're Nevada Conservation League, and this was the Sustainability Podcast. Thanks for hanging out.